Have you ever wondered why some people seem to recover, truly recover, from diseases that others are told they must live with forever? I'm 102 years old now, and I will tell you something directly, without decoration. The body is not as fragile as we were taught. It is adaptive, regenerative, and constantly responding to what we feed it. What most people call aging or chronic illness is often the slow accumulation of biological stress signals. And what I discovered, not in theory but in lived experience, is this. Food is one of the most powerful signals of all. For many years, I lived the way most people do. I ate what was convenient, what was familiar, what was culturally normal. Meat at the center of the plate. Processed foods without a second thought. Sugar as comfort. I didn't question it until my body began to respond in ways I could no longer ignore. High blood pressure, rising blood sugar, fatigue that sleep could not fix, the kind of slow decline doctors label as manageable, but never reversible. That word manageable never sat right with me. So I began to ask a different question. Not how do I manage disease, but what environment does the body need to repair itself? This is where the science began to matter. When you shift to a plant-based diet, rich in whole grains, legumes, vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds, you are not just changing calories. You are altering the internal biochemical environment. Fiber begins to regulate glucose absorption, stabilizing insulin response. Antioxidants start neutralizing oxidative stress, reducing cellular damage. Phytonutrients, compounds found only in plants, interact with gene expression, turning down inflammatory pathways that drive chronic disease. This is not philosophy, it is physiology. I learned that chronic diseases, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, even certain inflammatory conditions, are not random events. They are the result of prolonged metabolic imbalance. And that imbalance is heavily influenced by what enters your body every single day. When I gradually transitioned my diet, something subtle but undeniable began to happen. My energy stabilized. My blood markers improved. But more importantly, the trajectory changed. I was no longer moving deeper into disease. I was moving away from it. Not instantly, not magically, but measurably. And that is the promise hidden inside the science. Not that food is a miracle cure, but that it can shift the direction of your biology. At 102, I am not here to sell you hope. I am here to give you clarity. If you change the inputs, you change the system. And in the next part, I will show you exactly how this works, down to the level of cells, blood, and the invisible processes that decide whether your body breaks down or begins to rebuild. Let me take you deeper, beyond the surface idea that plants are healthy, and into the actual machinery of the body, where disease either progresses or begins to reverse. Because if you truly understand this part, you will never look at food the same way again. Chronic disease does not begin with symptoms. It begins silently, at the cellular level, long before a diagnosis is ever written on paper. What we call heart disease, diabetes, or hypertension are not isolated conditions. They are downstream effects of a disrupted internal environment. And that environment is shaped in large part by what you repeatedly eat. Let's start with inflammation. Inflammation is not the enemy. It is a necessary biological response, your body's way of protecting and repairing itself. But when inflammation becomes chronic, low-grade, and persistent, it transforms from a healing tool into a destructive force. It begins to damage blood vessels, interfere with insulin signaling, and accelerate tissue breakdown. Now here is where diet becomes critical. Animal-based and highly processed foods tend to promote inflammatory pathways. They are often high in saturated fats, advanced glycation end products, AGEs, and pro-inflammatory compounds that accumulate over time. These substances activate immune responses unnecessarily, keeping the body in a constant state of internal alarm. In contrast, whole plant foods are naturally anti-inflammatory. They are rich in antioxidants, molecules that neutralize free radicals, which are unstable compounds that damage cells. Polyphenols, flavonoids, carotenoids, these are not just abstract scientific terms. They are active agents that reduce oxidative stress and calm inflammatory signaling at the molecular level. When I shifted my diet, I wasn't just eating more vegetables. I was lowering the background noise of inflammation that had been quietly damaging my body for years. Next, let's talk about insulin resistance, the core mechanism behind type 2 diabetes and a major contributor to many other chronic conditions. When you consume refined carbohydrates, excess fats, and low-fiber foods, your blood sugar rises rapidly. In response, your body releases insulin to move that sugar into cells. But over time, if this process is constantly overstimulated, the cells begin to resist insulin's signal. This is called insulin resistance. Think of it like this. The signal is still being sent, but the cells stop listening. This leads to elevated blood sugar, increased fat storage, and a cascade of metabolic dysfunction. Now here is where plant-based diets demonstrate something remarkable. Whole plant foods are naturally high in fiber, both soluble and insoluble. Fiber slows down the absorption of glucose, preventing sharp spikes in blood sugar. It also improves insulin sensitivity, allowing cells to respond more effectively to insulin. But there's more. Fiber is not just a digestive aid, it is fuel for your gut microbiome. Inside your digestive system lives a vast ecosystem of bacteria, trillions of them. These microbes are not passive. They actively influence your metabolism, immune system, and even inflammation levels. When you eat fiber-rich plant foods, you are feeding beneficial bacteria. These bacteria produce short-chain fatty acids, such as butyrate, which have powerful anti-inflammatory effects and improve the integrity of the gut lining. A healthy gut barrier prevents harmful substances from leaking into the bloodstream, a phenomenon known as leaky gut, which is increasingly associated with chronic inflammation and disease progression. In other words, plant foods don't just feed you, they regulate the entire ecosystem inside you. Now let's move to the cardiovascular system. Heart disease remains one of the leading causes of death worldwide. But what is often overlooked is that it is largely a disease of the blood vessels, not just the heart itself. The inner lining of your blood vessels is called the endothelium. Its job is to regulate blood flow, prevent clotting, and maintain vascular health. When this lining becomes damaged, Through inflammation, oxidative stress, and high LDL cholesterol, plaques begin to form. These plaques narrow the arteries, restrict blood flow, and increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. Here is where plant-based nutrition shows one of its most well-documented effects. Diets rich in whole plant foods have been shown to reduce LDL cholesterol levels, improve endothelial function, and even contribute to the regression of atherosclerotic plaques in some cases. Why? Because plant foods contain no dietary cholesterol and are low in saturated fat. At the same time, they are rich in soluble fiber, which binds to cholesterol in the digestive system and helps remove it from the body. Additionally, compounds like nitric oxide, supported by nitrate-rich vegetables such as leafy greens, help relax and dilate blood vessels, improving circulation. This is not theoretical. These mechanisms have been observed, measured, and documented in clinical settings. And yet most people are never taught this in a way that feels actionable. Now let's address oxidative stress. Every cell in your body produces energy through metabolic processes. In doing so, it generates byproducts called free radicals. In small amounts, these are manageable, but when production exceeds the body's ability to neutralize them, oxidative stress occurs. This stress damages DNA, proteins, and cell membranes, accelerating aging and contributing to chronic disease. Plant-based diets are uniquely positioned to counter this. They are the primary source of antioxidants in the human diet. Vitamin C, vitamin E, beta-carotene, and a wide range of phytonutrients work together to neutralize free radicals and protect cellular integrity. When I learned this, I realized something profound. Disease is not just about what goes wrong, it's about what is missing. When your diet lacks protective compounds, the body becomes vulnerable. But when you consistently supply these compounds, you strengthen the system at its core. Now, I want to be precise about something. A plant-based diet is not automatically healthy. You can eat processed plant foods, refined sugars, and still create metabolic damage. The science supports whole food, minimally processed plant-based nutrition, not simply the absence of animal products. This distinction matters because what we are really talking about is nutrient density, fiber content, and biochemical impact, not labels. As I continued this way of eating, I began to see patterns, not just in myself, but in others who followed similar paths. Blood pressure normalized, blood sugar stabilized, medications were reduced under medical supervision, energy returned. Not in every case, not uniformly, but consistently enough to recognize a trend. And that trend aligns with what the science has been quietly showing for decades. The body responds to the environment you create. If the internal environment is inflammatory, insulin-resistant, and nutrient-deficient, disease progresses. If the environment becomes anti-inflammatory, insulin-sensitive, and nutrient-rich, the body begins to repair within its biological limits. That last part is important. We are not overriding biology. We are working with it. At 102, I do not claim perfection. I do not claim invincibility. But I have seen in my own body what happens when you stop interfering with the body's natural processes and start supporting them instead. And in the next part, I will take you even further, not just into the mechanisms, but into the practical reality of how these changes unfold over time, and what most people misunderstand about recovery. Now, let me tell you something most people misunderstand about recovery. They expect it to feel dramatic. They imagine a moment, a clear turning point, where the body suddenly shifts from illness to health. But that is not how biological systems work. Recovery, when it happens, is quiet. It is incremental. It is often invisible in the beginning. And because of that, many people stop too soon, long before the deeper changes have time to take hold. At 102, I have learned to respect time as much as I respect science. When I changed my diet, I did not feel transformed overnight. In fact, the first phase was subtle, almost disappointing if you were expecting something immediate. But beneath that surface, processes had already begun. Within days, blood sugar variability begins to stabilize when fiber intake increases. Within weeks, insulin sensitivity can improve. Within months, lipid profiles, LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, can shift in measurable ways. But the deeper processes, the ones that truly alter disease trajectory, take longer. Let me explain what is happening during that time. The body is constantly rebuilding itself. Cells die and regenerate. Proteins are broken down and resynthesized. Even the lining of your blood vessels is being renewed. When you change your diet, you are not just influencing current function. You are influencing what the next version of your body will be made of. This is where consistency becomes more powerful than intensity. A single healthy meal does not repair damage, but thousands of aligned meals begin to alter the structure and function of tissues. The bloodstream carries different nutrients. The microbiome shifts its composition. Inflammatory signaling decreases. Over time, these small changes accumulate into something significant. I began to notice this not in dramatic events, but in patterns. I no longer experienced the sharp energy crashes that once defined my afternoons. My sleep deepened. My body felt stable. And stability, I came to understand, is one of the earliest signs of internal balance. But there is something else that happens during recovery, something less talked about. The body begins to recalibrate its baseline. When you have lived for years in a state of high sugar intake, high salt, high fat, your sensory system adapts. Strong flavors become normal. Subtle flavors disappear. Hunger signals become distorted. When I first transitioned to whole plant foods, everything felt bland. Not because the food lacked flavor, but because my perception had been conditioned. This is where many people fail. They interpret this phase as deprivation, when in reality it is recalibration. After a few weeks, something shifted. Natural sweetness in fruits became more pronounced. The complexity of vegetables emerged. My cravings changed, not by force, but by adaptation. This is not psychological. It is neurobiological. Dopamine pathways, those same reward circuits that respond to sugar and processed foods, begin to adjust. The brain learns to derive satisfaction from different inputs. And when that happens, adherence becomes easier, not because of discipline, but because of alignment. Now, Let's talk about a critical distinction: symptom relief versus disease reversal. Many treatments in modern medicine focus on managing symptoms, lowering blood pressure, reducing blood sugar, controlling cholesterol. These are important, but they do not always address the underlying cause. A plant-based dietary pattern, when properly implemented, operates differently. It targets upstream mechanisms. Instead of forcing blood sugar down through medication, it improves insulin sensitivity. Instead of only lowering cholesterol pharmacologically, it reduces the intake of harmful fats while increasing the body's ability to remove excess cholesterol. Instead of suppressing inflammation, it removes many of the triggers that sustain it. This is what creates the possibility of reversal in certain conditions. But I will be precise here because precision matters. Not all diseases are reversible. Not all damage can be undone. And not every individual will respond the same way. Recovery exists on a spectrum. For some, it means complete normalization of biomarkers. For others, it means slowing progression, reducing medication dependence, or improving quality of life. These outcomes are not failures, they are meaningful shifts in trajectory. The mistake people make is expecting perfection, and when they do not see it, they abandon progress. I did not aim for perfection. I aimed for direction. Now let me bring in something that changed how I understood long-term health entirely: metabolic flexibility. A healthy body is not rigid, it is adaptable. It can efficiently switch between using glucose and fat for energy. It can respond to changes in food intake without extreme fluctuations in blood sugar or energy levels. Chronic disease often reflects a loss of this flexibility. When insulin resistance develops, the body becomes overly dependent on glucose and less capable of utilizing fat. Energy becomes unstable. Hunger signals become dysregulated. A whole food plant-based diet, rich in complex carbohydrates and low in harmful fats, can help restore this flexibility, particularly when combined with appropriate lifestyle factors like movement and fasting intervals. Yes, fasting. Not extreme, not reckless, but strategic periods of not eating can enhance insulin sensitivity and promote cellular repair processes such as autophagy. This is the body's way of cleaning out damaged components and recycling them. I did not practice this in a rigid or dogmatic way, but I allowed space between meals. I stopped eating late at night, and over time I could feel the difference, not as a sensation, but as a steadiness in my system. Now I want to address something people rarely consider: the role of cumulative exposure. Disease is not caused by a single meal. It is the result of repeated exposure to harmful inputs over years, sometimes decades. In the same way, recovery is not triggered by a single change. It is the result of sustained exposure to beneficial inputs. Think of it as direction over time. If you are walking toward a cliff, every step matters. But if you turn around, even slightly, and continue in the opposite direction, the outcome changes completely. This is what dietary change represents. Not a quick fix, but a shift in trajectory. At my age, people often ask me, "What is your secret?" They expect something rare, something unusual. But the truth is simpler and more demanding. I stopped asking what was convenient. I started asking what was biologically appropriate. I aligned my daily inputs with what supports cellular function, not just immediate satisfaction. And over time, my body responded. Not perfectly, not completely, but consistently. Now let me be clear about one more thing. This approach requires responsibility. You cannot outsource your health entirely to doctors, medications, or external systems. These have their place, an important place, but they do not replace the daily decisions that shape your internal environment. Food is not the only factor, but it is one of the most frequent, most consistent influences you have. 3 times a day, every day, you are either reinforcing dysfunction or supporting repair. That is not a moral statement, it is a biological one. And once you understand that, you begin to see your choices differently, not as restrictions, but as inputs, not as sacrifices, but as signals. At 102, I no longer think in terms of short-term pleasure versus long-term cost. I think in terms of alignment. What aligns with the systems that keep me alive, functional, and clear? That question has guided me more than any rule. And in the final part, I will leave you with something practical, not just theory, not just mechanisms, but a way to begin, without confusion, without extremes, and without losing sight of what truly matters. So let me leave you with this, clear, practical, and grounded in everything I have lived and observed over more than a century. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Your body is not confused. It is responsive. It responds to patterns, to repetition, to what you consistently provide. And the science we have discussed is not abstract. It is describing exactly how your body behaves under different conditions. When you center your diet around whole plant foods, you are not following a trend. You are changing the signals your body receives at the most fundamental level. You reduce inflammation. You improve insulin sensitivity. You support your blood vessels. You nourish your microbiome. You protect your cells from oxidative damage. That is the mechanism. But mechanism alone is not enough. You need direction. So here is where you begin, not with perfection, but with clarity. Start by looking at your plate, not emotionally, not culturally, but biologically. Ask a simple question. Does this food support cellular function, or does it burden it? Then adjust, gradually but intentionally. Add more whole foods, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds. Reduce what interferes, highly processed foods, excess saturated fats, refined sugars. You do not need to change everything overnight, but you do need to change something consistently, because consistency is what rewires the system. Give your body time to adapt. Remember what I told you, recovery is quiet. The first changes may not be visible, but they are happening. Blood chemistry shifts. Hormonal signals stabilize. The microbiome reorganizes. These are not things you feel immediately, but they are things that determine your future. Do not chase quick results. Chase correct inputs. And understand this clearly. This is not about rejecting medicine. It is about complementing it. There are situations where medical intervention is necessary, even life-saving. But alongside that, there is always the question of environment, what you are doing every day that either supports or undermines those interventions. You have more influence than you think, not total control, but meaningful influence. At 102, I do not claim that this path makes you immune to illness. That would be dishonest. But I can tell you this with certainty. It changes the probability. It changes the direction. And in many cases, it changes the outcome. I have seen decline slow. I have seen conditions stabilize. I have seen markers improve. And I have felt in my own body the difference between living in a state of constant strain and living in a state of relative balance. That difference is not dramatic. It is steady, and steady is what lasts. So if you are waiting for the perfect moment, do not. If you are waiting for certainty, you already have enough. Start where you are. Change what you can. Repeat it tomorrow. Because in the end, recovery is not a single event. It is a direction you choose, again and again, until your body has no choice but to follow.